Hello everyone, and welcome to a brand new video on blood flow through the heart. Quite an important topic for those of you who are looking into going into healthcare fields. So let's begin to look at a few things. First off, we're going to look at the general anatomy of the heart, and then we're going to look at things like the chambers, the major vessels, and the valves of the heart. And then we're going to see how that flows through the heart in a generalized diagram. And then we'll come back and look at that on a anatomical diagram as well. So let's look at some of the general structures of the heart. And first off, the mammalian heart, including the human heart, possesses 4 different chambers. Now, this being the right side, and this being the left side of the heart, there would be a right atrium, and there would be a left atrium. Now, we're going to see that the atria, plural, receive blood from the veins. And there's also going to be a right ventricle and a left ventricle. And the ventricles will pump blood out to arteries. Now, given that, let's also look at some of the principal vessels. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep those posted as well. And let's start with a vessel here called the superior vena cava. And I'm going to abbreviate it SVC because it's very hard to find some room. And down here, the inferior vena cava, abbreviated IVC. That's going to bring blood to the right atrium. Also, we have the major artery here called the aorta. And we'll see that the aorta does have a multitude of different smaller vessels that come off of it and branches, but this is the primary artery that delivers blood to the whole body systems. Then we have our pulmonary trunk that will bifurcate outwards to become the pulmonary arteries. And also these vessels here, which are the pulmonary veins. So with the generalized anatomy of the heart, let's take a look at how the overall heart would function in blood flow. So to do that, we're going to draw a very simplistic schematic of the heart and represent our heart if it was a box diagram of various sizes here. So what we're going to do is we're going to separate out 2 boxes here for what the body and lungs are doing. So let's look at body systems, and let's look at lungs, and let's look at the 4 chambers of the heart. First off, our right atrium, remember, is our atria are a little bit smaller chambers, right? And our left atria. If you look at the atria, they are considerably smaller than the ventricles. So this would be a right ventricle, and this would be a left ventricle. Now, we're not getting into generalized anatomy here where we would get into the septa and all that different bits here. This is mostly just generalized anatomy with the principal valves and things like that. Now, what we want to do is add one more bit of anatomy here where we have to put some valves in and things like that as well. And I'm going to use valves in a different color. We have a valve here located between the right atrium and right ventricle. This is the right AV valve, which is referred to as the tricuspid. Remember, you should always try to be right. And this one here being the left AV valve, or also called the mitral or bicuspid valve. The other 2 valves that are located on this diagram are located one here and one that should be here. This one being the pulmonary semilunar valve, and this one here being the aortic semilunar valve as well. So let's take a look at these valves. So reminder that we have valves located between the atria and the ventricles called the atrioventricular valves. The one between the right atrium and the right ventricle is sometimes called the tricuspid valve, right? And between the left atrium and left ventricle, we have the bicuspid valve or mitral valve. And leaving out, and I'm going to use a slightly different color here. Let me pick a purpley kind of color for this one. We have some valves here, and we have our what is referred to as the pulmonary semilunar valve. And over here, the aortic semilunar. Now, what we want to start off with is our basic understanding here that our body systems are going to be bringing in oxygen and producing CO2 as a waste product, right? So our body tissues are consuming oxygen. So when blood leaves the body system, it is going to be referred to as being deoxygenated, right? Because it has consumed oxygen. And the blood flow that brings us to our right atrium is done so via the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava, the two veins that will bring blood to the right atrium. Now that blood, as it fills the right atrium, will then pass through our tricuspid valve, our right atrioventricular valve, and begin to fill the right ventricle. From there, that blood fills the right ventricle and is left to go out the pulmonary semilunar valve out to our lungs. Now, what happens in our lungs is also quite an important thing. Our lungs are going to breathe out the CO2 and breathe in the oxygen that we need, and that is going to ensure that the blood that leaves our lungs is oxygenated. And so oxygenated blood will begin to leave out the lungs and go to the left atrium. Now, give that, what we've just done here is actually part of our pulmonary circuit. Our pulmonary arteries take blood away from the heart, away from right ventricle to the lungs, where it gets oxygenated and arrives to the heart via the pulmonary veins. And once the oxygenated blood enters the left atrium through pulmonary veins, it fills that chamber up and it passes through to the left ventricle, where it will begin to fill as it passes through the bicuspid valve or the mitral valve. It exits out this, fills up the left ventricle, and then will leave to go to the body systems. And it takes out a vessel called the aorta as it passes through. The aorta guards backflow through the left ventricle to the aorta is protected by the aortic semilunar. So that's completed one circuit. Now, what I also want to make a couple of important points to you guys is this. First off, the two atria contract simultaneously, and then they'll relax. And the two ventricles will contract simultaneously as well, and then they'll relax. So we are moving blood into the chambers and out of the chambers at the same time when the two atria receive blood through the veins, they receive them at the same time, and they make the blood pass out of them roughly at the same time, and the ventricles fill up at the same time, and they pump blood out roughly at the same time as well. Now this has to do with timing and things like that of how the conducting system works. But a couple things to help you also remember this is some mnemonics for the order. If we're starting at body systems and going towards the heart, we have a mnemonic I like to use. Try pulling my aorta. So what we do is we start off, blood goes first through the tricuspid valve, then the pulmonary semilunar valve, then the mitral valve, and then out the aortic semilunar valve. Try pulling my aorta. 1, 2, 3, and 4 valves in order of going from body systems through the heart and back to the body systems. So I hope you found this video useful. This will be very useful in understanding some fetal defects and things like that. But this simplistic version of the heart, if we take it back to look at this, you could see how that would work and blood would pass through. So what I'm going to do real quick is just erase this and show you guys a little bit on this, how the blood would flow through the real heart before we move on today. So let's look at the real thing, right? So what we're going to do is take our deoxygenated blood either through the inferior vena cava and superior vena cava and bring that blood into our right atrium. As it fills up, that blood passes through the right AV valve, fills up the right ventricle, and then eventually what's going to happen is there's a valve here that we would exit to lungs out the pulmonary semilunar valve. At the lungs, we pick up some oxygen, and oxygenated blood going to the pulmonary veins, entering into our atria. Now, that would only be the left atria. Then it passes through the left AV valve into the left ventricle to eventually go through the aortic semilunar valve out to body systems. So this is how we make one complete loop. Now, if you understand that the both ventricles contract simultaneously when they contract, they relax simultaneously when they relax. The two atria contract simultaneously when they contract, and they relax simultaneously when they relax. Blood moves linearly, and that's what we have going on. It should always move forward as the valves start to open and close in a sequential sequence to try to prevent backflow of blood. So if you haven't, please draw this schematic with me during the video. Go back, rewind it, make sure that you understand how to do that, because this is an extremely important concept for students who are trying to study anatomy and physiology and try to understand how the body works. I'd like to thank you for being part of this video, and this concludes my video on blood flow through the heart. Thank you guys, and please let me know other topics you would like to see in the future. Thank you so much.